military aircraft, another plane, midair collision over D.C. I mean, it's the kind of news that just stops you in your tracks,
It really does.
67 lives lost,
Yeah.
including U.S. soldiers. Just a horrible tragedy. Really sent shockwaves, I think, across the nation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
President Trump even addressed the country. And, it sparked this whole conversation, this really important conversation about aviation safety, about air traffic control.
Yeah.
And what needs to change. So that's what we're diving into today, President Trump's speech and all the talk about reforms in aviation safety and air traffic control.
Yeah, I think it's a moment, when something like this happens, the whole aviation industry kind of takes a breath, like a collective breath, and looks inward. What can we do better? How can we prevent this? It's a moment of reflection, but also a call to action, for sure.
It does feel like a turning point, a real turning point, yeah. And, listening to President Trump's address to the nation, it's hard not to hear, like, the sorrow in his voice, but also this real determination, to figure out what happened. He really emphasized the need for the highest standards, like the absolute highest standards of safety and competence within the FAA. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think it's a really powerful statement, and it underlines just how much responsibility the FAA holds, right? They're tasked with ensuring the safety of millions of passengers every single day. And when something like this happens, it does make you question, are the systems we have in place, are they really robust enough? And are they doing everything possible to maintain those highest standards? Tough questions, but important ones.
For sure. And going through all the material for this deep dive, one thing that really jumped out, something that people are starting to talk about more openly now, is the potential impact of diversity hiring practices on air traffic safety specifically. It's a sensitive topic, for sure, but I think one that we need to discuss. So how do we balance, the need for a diverse workforce, which is so important, with the absolute necessity of maintaining the highest possible safety standards?
Yeah.
Especially in a role, as critical as air traffic control.
Right, it's a complex issue, and there's no simple answer, no easy solution. But it's a conversation we need to have. Look, striving for a diverse workforce is a good thing, an important thing, but we have to acknowledge that in roles where, literally lives are on the line, competence and expertise have to be the top priority, the number one priority. It has to be non-negotiable. So I think maybe the key lies in rigorous training and assessment programs that are really designed to provide a level playing field, and to make sure that everyone, and I mean everyone, is meeting the same high standards, regardless of their background. That's what we should be aiming for.
Yeah. It really makes you think about all the different factors that go into aviation safety and how everything has to work together perfectly. And speaking of figuring things out, the NTSB investigation, that's going to be absolutely crucial in understanding what caused this collision.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they're looking at everything, right? The radar data,
Yeah.
eyewitness accounts, the maintenance records, the whole 9 yards, really.
Yeah.
So what kind of information are they hoping to glean, I guess, from all of that?
Well, I think, if you look at radar data, for example, that can really reveal some crucial details about what happened in the moments leading up to a collision. Investigators are going to be looking for any sudden changes in altitude and direction, anything that might point to pilot error, mechanical failure,
Sure.
things like that. And then you have eyewitness accounts. Now, those can be a bit more subjective, of course, but they can still offer really valuable perspectives, especially if you have multiple people on the ground who saw the same thing.
Right.
And then, of course, there are the maintenance records, and those are really essential for understanding the history of the aircraft. Were there any, pre-existing issues, anything that could have contributed to the accident? So each piece of the puzzle, it helps build a more complete picture of what happened.
Yeah, like putting together this giant jigsaw puzzle, and each piece is a clue.
Exactly.
And, it's interesting with this case, this puzzle, there's an international dimension here, too. Because we know Russian nationals were involved in the collision, which obviously adds another layer of complexity to everything.
Yeah, absolutely, because now you have to think about repatriating the remains, and that's a sensitive issue, a diplomatic process, that needs careful coordination between the U.S. and Russia. It really highlights how, even in the face of tragedy, even in these awful situations, we're all interconnected globally.
Right. And, President Trump, in his address, he didn't mince words. He really called for swift reforms
Yeah.
in aviation safety and air traffic control. You can hear that urgency in his voice.
You really can. And I think that urgency is reflected in some of the initial responses, too. Like
Yeah.
the Army Secretary nominee, they even acknowledged the need to reevaluate pilot training programs, specifically thinking about training around busy airports.
It makes you wonder, what are the specific challenges, do you think, that pilots face when they're flying in such congested airspace, especially around those major hubs?
Well, I mean, think about it. When you're flying around a major hub, you're constantly having to adjust your altitude, your speed, you're communicating with air traffic control, you're monitoring multiple aircraft, all of them in close proximity. It's like a high-stakes ballet in the sky.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, specialized training is crucial for pilots to develop the situational awareness, the decision-making skills they need to operate safely in that kind of intense environment. That can really make all the difference.
So it seems like this tragedy, as awful as it is, it's really sparked this much-needed conversation about the future of aviation safety. I mean, we're talking about everything, from hiring practices and training programs to air traffic control procedures, and even the role of technology.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The NTSB investigation, it's going to be critical, not just for understanding what caused this specific collision, but also for identifying broader areas where we can improve, or we can make changes to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again in the future. It's about learning from this heartbreak and making the skies safer forever.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought, a question to really ponder. As technology keeps advancing, right, and our airspace, it's only going to get more crowded. How do we make sure that aviation safety remains the #1 priority? How do we balance all of this innovation, the efficiency, with the absolute necessity of protecting human lives? Because ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
It's the core of it all.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Until next time.